All right, welcome everyone to another episode of AppSec 101. My name is Andrew Garrett, and I work in product marketing here at Micro Focus Fortify. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Eric Eccles. And Eric is the Strategic Solutions Architect here at Micro Focus Fortify. And he's been a part of the Fortify team for about 7 years now. And one interesting thing that I learned about Eric is before working for Fortify, he was actually a customer of Fortify. So he's very familiar with the Fortify tools, and he worked for the government, was a developer before working in security. So he has about 20 years of development experience as well. So Eric, thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it's great to be here. One of the perspectives that I can bring, that I bring to customers and to our life cycle, as we call it in software, is that I do have that experience of, and I'm grateful for the experience that I had as a developer and as a security architect, and now and for the last 7 years as a security solutions and application security expert. So,
Eric, glad you could join us. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's dive in. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you today. So first of all, there's a phrase that we hear in the industry that is shifting DAST left. And, for those that may be familiar with DAST and, the application security development lifecycle, what does that mean when we say we need to shift DAST left?
So from a high-level view, dynamic application security testing, we're looking at how that application interacts, how it works, and what security vulnerabilities we can elicit while we're testing those, right? So generally, that's been done later in the life cycle, later after the application has already been deployed, or while it's in the staging environment. Well, when we're talking about moving DAST left, we're trying to get as close to the developers as we can. So as part of the deployment process, when developers are deploying the software to, say, their QA environment, moving DAST left for us means that we're able to test it as part of the normal pipeline. We're able to elicit those responses and determine if there are any security issues from a DAST perspective at as far left as we can in that pipeline process.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit more about that pipeline process. And, why is it so important to be testing earlier in the pipeline? Why can't we wait until later on in the QA portion of the pipeline? Why are we needing to move it earlier?
So, and this is the constant battle between of bugs. We can create and we can treat bugs just as we would a security issue, because a security issue is a type of defect. It's just a security defect instead of a functional defect. And based on years and years and years of analysis and experience in both development and application security, we know empirically that the later that we wait to identify and to attempt to remediate an issue, the more cost is involved. So if we're waiting until a product has made it to the QA department or to a QA stage or to the staging, then more people have gotten involved in deploying that software, managing that software. So it becomes a regression to have to go back and remediate issues after they've already made it to that progression point. So the earlier we can identify those, the greater value to the organization and to that application those issues are. Because we're not only providing the value of being able to secure that software, but we're also decreasing the costs that are inherent in furthering that process and of the development and the deployment process. We're cutting those costs and cutting the number of individuals that have to actually look at that code and make changes to it as far as the deployment and the development.
Okay. So Eric, it sounds like what you're saying is, by putting off this testing, we're actually creating more work for ourselves. rather than just knocking it out earlier.
We absolutely are. I mean, that's one of the challenges that we have, is that the later it requires more authorizations, more users to approve. And as well, not only that, it may require more. If it happens later in the process, it may be that the developer is not familiar with that code anymore. So now they have to refresh themselves on what that function or what that page was actually accomplishing. So they lose that immediate knowledge of what they were trying to accomplish and the immediate knowledge of, oh, this is how I should fix this issue. So if we can move that closer to the developer, then the developer is going to have that immediate short-term memory of what they were trying to do. So it's the difference between a short-term memory fix and then a long-term memory fix. It's always easier from a development standpoint. If I remember, if I did something yesterday, it's the top of mind, where if I did something a week, 2 weeks, or possibly a month ago, then I've probably moved on to 10 additional processes by then. So I've lost that immediate short-term memory to fix that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up. And when we talk about DAST, so from what I understand about DAST versus SAST, SAST, you have access to that source code. DAST, you need a running application. So is there a point in the software development lifecycle where it's almost too early to test because you need the app to be up and running? Is that correct?
Well, what we're seeing now in the DevOps pipeline, it's all automated, right? So they're automating the deployment of the software. So it's with a DAST. With DAST, you can have a MVP, a minimally viable product, and still be able to execute a DAST test. But so the DAST is the difference. The main difference between a DAST scan and a static scan is that with dynamic, you're not only testing the application, but you're also testing the integration of that application. So all of the integrations have to exist, but that's why it fits very well into a QA deployment, because in QA, they're already running, and a lot of times developers already have their functional tests that already require that environment to be viable and to be able to be testing. So if we can mirror that process with DAST, we're going to have much better results.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about the risks a little bit now. So, for those users that are running DAST earlier in the life cycle and they're shifting it left, what risks can be mitigated by those that do that?
So this is any issue that can be identified by DAST is going to be identified anytime you run DAST. And anytime that one of the real shifts that we want to make with DAST, though, is to mirror that functional testing and to micro size the types of scans, the depth of the scan, so that we can get faster results. Because one of the challenges with DAST is that DAST scans take a long time. They can take considerably more time than a static scan. So if we can narrow the amount of time or the footprint that we have to test, that's how one of the methods that we can use to shift left also. And that's one of the advancements that we're working on and that we're accomplishing every day, is creating those smaller pieces that we can test that can be at the functional level as opposed to the overarching comprehensive level.
Okay. So let's talk about some solutions for a minute. Obviously, you're familiar with Fortify and the capabilities that Fortify has for DAST. In your experience, both as a Fortify user and even in your previous experience as a developer, what are some solutions that you might recommend to people that are looking for a good DAST solution?
Well, obviously, I'm here, so I'm always going to say that we have a very good solution, right? Our solution is going to provide you the context and the ability of those in our dynamic tests to find those issues, to identify what are the issues in the integration and operation of that application. So that's really what you're looking for with a DAS test. And you could think of a DAS test as an early, less intensive penetration test. If you can cover up to, like, say 60 to 70% of what would be included in a formal penetration test with a dynamic scan, you're moving some of those activities, or a lot of those activities, out into the earlier process. So that's why with WebInspect, we want to try to we want to embed it's part of the pipeline. And where our improvements that we're making now with EDAS, moving our dynamic solution into and integrating that with our Fortify Software Security Center, and having our Scan Central be able to go across both static and dynamic and manage it from one location and provide the results in one view as Software Security Center is going to be a huge benefit to our customers and to security professionals in general, because we're not dealing with multiple products. I hear every day that customers are having challenges having to manage multiple different products that are providing different results, oftentimes competing or duplicate results because they're running static and dynamic. With SCA and SSC and WebInspect all together in one package called Scan Central, we can provide all of those results in one view, one pane of glass, that really minimizes the challenges where you're combining multiple tool sets from multiple vendors, and we have the complete solution.
That's great. And, I'm glad you brought up the comparison to almost an early penetration test, because that's a comparison I've heard before, in the sense that DAST is, actively working to exploit vulnerabilities, right? Whereas, SAST, it's more just looking at the code, but it's not actually going in and poking and prodding, trying to, elicit responses from the code. Is that correct?
That's right. So with DAST, it's testing that application. So it is sending non-malicious attack vectors, or attacks, checks is what we call them, right? Or we're sending those values or those checks against the parameters that are available in that application. So you're getting the result and the true experience of what that application would elicit, the performance as well as the actions of that application. So it's different from with static scanning, we're looking more at a white box test. With dynamic, it's more of a black box. But in addition to our IaaS solution called WebInspect Agent, we can also get a hybrid black-white box because we can see the full footprint of that application.
Awesome. Well, this is some great information, Eric. And maybe just to wrap things up, if you could share just a few recommendations on some best practices.
So, I mean, honestly, this whole conversation has been about one of our best practices, right? We want to move left, right? But one of the other things that we want to do with dynamic testing is have different policies, right? So there's going to be different policies that you use based on the findings that are exhibited or the issues that are found from a dynamic test. With dynamic testing, there's certain issues that a developer would be able to mitigate, but there's also going to be issues that operations or the deployment team would be responsible for mitigating. So using the policies and having separate policies or scan templates for those different audiences is very important, because that's going to limit the amount of noise that developers have to view and have to deal with. That's one of the major points that I would talk about.
Okay. Well, that's great. And Eric, I want to say thank you for your time today, and sharing some knowledge with us. And, to our viewers, if you have any questions, please feel free to comment below. And we hope to see you all in another episode of AppSec 101. Thanks very much.